So, welcome everyone. My name is Haruka Raudabush. I'm the Senior Programs Manager at the Japanese Cultural and Community Center of Northern California, based in San Francisco's Japantown. And we're really excited to bring you today's Tadaima virtual pilgrimage program, small group discussion in the community. And today's topic of discussion will be Nikkei spaces on college campuses. Um, we wanted to showcase a discussion that would go into, I guess, a very interesting part of our community and community spaces on our college campuses and explore different ways in which the college campus organization is a space for people to not only connect and create community on their college campuses, but also provides them a space to really explore their own cultural identities as well. And so we have a bunch of panelists here with us today to share their experiences being part of college campus organizations from all different parts of the country. But before that, I'll explain a little bit of what Tadaima is. And so for those of you unfamiliar, Tadaima is a virtual community pilgrimage that was started last year in response to many of the in-person pilgrimages to the various World War II incarceration campsites where the Japanese American community was incarcerated during World War II. Um, the trips were all canceled because of the pandemic last summer. And so, in response, a lot of different community organizers and organizations from across the country decided to collaborate and put together a series of virtual programs. So, last year, the Tadaima program ran for 9 weeks in the summer and culminated in over 370 different virtual program segments such as the one we're in today. And that has continued on into this year. And so for this year's Tadaima program, it's a little bit shorter. It's only 4 weeks, and we're now into our final week of the this year's program. But we hope that if you haven't already checked out the Tadaima website, you can check it out at janpilgrimages.com/Tadaima2021, and you can see the remaining programs on the schedule for this year that go into our community's history of World War II incarceration and the development and trajectory of the community following it. And the upcoming schedule, besides that, we also have recordings of our past sessions as well. So do check that out and review any of the past sessions if you'd like. So with that, I would like to turn it over to today's moderator, Ayako, and she can introduce the rest of today's panelists. So thanks for being with us. And of course, we'll have a small group discussion afterwards. We hope that you guys all join in the discussion as well. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ayako. Let's see, I guess for context in this panel, I graduated 2 years ago from the University of Michigan, and I was involved a little bit with the JSA. Fumi can probably attest that I was a weak member. So I'm really glad that you all can join us today to speak to this panel. And before we get started, if you all would just introduce yourselves, you feel free to share a little bit about yourself as well as the campus organization you're kind of representing, when you were involved with it, and what your role was when you were involved with the org. So if we want to go Emiko, Yoko, and then Fumi, maybe.
Hi, everyone. My name is Emiko. I use she, her pronouns. I graduated from UCLA back in 2017. I'm currently a master's student there doing the Asian American Studies MA in Community Health Sciences MPH dual master's program. So by the time I finish this, I will have been at UCLA for 9 years because I also worked here after undergrad. So people are like, why don't you just make it 10? That sounds scary for some reason. But anyway, it's really given me the opportunity to stay involved in the Japanese American community. And that all started in undergrad for me. I was involved with the UCLA Nikkei Student Union. I served as the external vice president, the cultural night producer, as well as the president. And then I was also the second president of the Intercollegiate Nikkei Council of Southern California, which in my time, I think it was a collective of 10 schools, NSUs in Southern California. I think now they might have 12 or 13, so it has grown. But yeah, it was a really interesting time when they were just getting started with like this concept of having a president and a board. So it was really fun. And I'll still tell people like, oh yeah, I was queen of all of the Nikkei in Southern California, and it was a good time. But yeah, nice to meet you all.
Oh, hi everybody. My name is Yoko. I graduated from University of Washington in 2020. And while I was there, I founded or co-founded and was president of our NSU. And yeah, born and raised in Seattle. My pronouns are she, her. And yeah, I'm excited to talk to you guys.
Hey everyone, so I'm Fumi. I met Ayako back at the University of Michigan, but I graduated from the University of Michigan back in May, so I'm just a recent graduate. Let's see, I grew up here in Ann Arbor for the most of my life, but I was lucky enough to spend 2 years of my high school at an international school in Tokyo. That's when I discovered that actually the Japanese side of me is quite important to who I am. And so when I got to University of Michigan, I really wanted to explore that. So starting from my first year, I was just a general member with the Japan Student Association on campus. And then I ended up being the treasurer my sophomore year, followed by vice president, and finally president my senior year. The interesting thing is that because of last year with COVID and everything, there was quite an interesting time to be a part of some sort of student organization there. But yeah, I'm looking forward to talking more with all of you.
Cool. Well, thank you all for sharing. I'm excited to dive into some of these questions and learn more about what makes our organization similar and maybe different. Also really cool that we were talking to some founders and like early members as well. I think that'll inform a lot of the discussion that we get to have later. So to further familiarize us with the organizations you all are representing, would you share a little bit about what are the goals and like the focus of your student organization? And we can start with whoever is ready. Doesn't necessarily have to be in the same order.
I can go first. I think Yoko, I saw you saying something, but I think you were muted, so I'll just stop. But for us, we started out as a pretty small organization, and we only started just a couple years before I had started. So I would say about, I think around 2015 or so was when we were refounded. There was a period of time where, because interest had died at the university, that it kind of fell apart, and eventually somebody just decided to gather their group of friends and kind of restart the organization. So it got larger and larger, and eventually the focus ended up being that anyone who had any interest in Japan, Japanese culture, anything like that was welcome. And the reason for that, of course, was to just be a place where we could talk about it, learn about it, and get to know one another, especially being a smaller organization. And on top of that, there tends to be other organizations on campus that focuses on more special parts of Japanese culture. So there's a anime club on campus, and they focus more so for lots of anime fans. And there's also Japanese language clubs that really attract people who just want to practice Japanese. So in general, our focus tends to be just for, regardless of background, if you have interest in Japan or Japanese culture, just come and hang out.
Yeah, I can go next because I can see Emiko wants some time to think. Yeah, so we originally started as our like founding members were all people who met as scholarship students for the Minidoka pilgrimage. So from the beginning, the idea of remembering our history and really trying to build community around that common goal was a big part of it. The actual first time we had the idea was, so our university already had a Japanese student association, and it just wasn't the right place for those of us. So I'm Yonsei, and for me, like my culture and my identity and my existence really is all very tied to the incarceration. And a lot of people my age, we grew up very aware of that fact. And I don't speak Japanese. I don't feel any particular connection to Japan other than that it was the place my ancestors came from 100 years ago, you know, so it's very different than people who are maybe Nikkei or even immigrated from Japan. And so we just going into JSA felt like a weird move for us because it just wasn't our space. And the whole, or part for me, part of the whole idea of an ethnic organization is a place where you can feel you really belong and you don't have to explain yourself. And it felt like that would be what we'd have to do if we went into our JSA. So the whole idea actually started when we attended a Day of Remembrance event at our school that our Japanese Student Association had put on. It was very well intentioned, and I really appreciated that they took the time to plan something like that. But it was also very clear that this was put on by people who were not part of that history in a familial, like really immediate and deep way. It was very clear that that was not the case, just because it was the way it was put on. There were just a lot of things that we would have done differently. And we were like, okay, we can't sit around and like be like, oh, this event was kind of weird without doing something about it. Let's like start our own thing. And what we ended up doing was collaborating with JSA because they were very cemented and had a lot of resources and stuff. We were tiny and did not know what was happening. So the first thing we did was made this club and then reach out to them, because obviously like there are a lot of things we do have in common, but the Japanese diaspora is not a monolith, and recognizing those differences, I think, can only bring us close together. Pretending that we're all the same and come from the same history does not help anyone, in my opinion. So we were like, okay, we want our own space. We want our own thing where we can really, really, focus on our history. But we also want to work together. So that was kind of the original idea. And we also, another really important goal, in Seattle, at least, there's like a really, really strong grassroots organizing arm of the Japanese American community who have been working really hard on closing some of the detention centers in our area and making those connections with our history. And those of us who started this NSU come from that. We all had been part of that and wanted to center that in our work, because for me and like a lot of us, your culture, your community, and your activism is the same. It's all one, like it's inextricable. So we were like, okay, we're just gonna make our own thing, see what happens. We don't know what we're doing. But we kind of just went for it and started like finding people. And yeah, so we were always like, okay, community, building community, remembering our history, bringing that forward with a spirit of activism. Those are kind of our core tenets. But yeah.
It's really interesting to hear from y'all because like for the UCLA NSU, I think when I was president, we might have been in like our 35th year. And so it just had a super long history, but I think that the organization would often kind of lose focus of like any goals in general. It was just kind of like, oh, we're already so established. There's like, all we need to do is get members and like, that's it, and not really move towards anything. So there was a period of time when I was in the organization where it just like wasn't clear of where it was going. We're so fortunate to have like Little Tokyo and Sawtell and these Japan towns around us, but there was just so little interest in contributing to those communities. And it was almost like we'd really taken for granted the fact that we had those things. So as time went on, people started to gain more interest in that. And we kind of had to acknowledge, not everyone's going to be involved in everything, but what we can do is make sure that these different areas people are interested in are the best that they can be for the people who are there. So there's like a solid group that would do community service and kind of growing that and growing the community connections and really kind of growing that sense of gratitude for this community was really big. That also helped provide opportunities for people to connect with like specific organizations in Little Tokyo. So kind of maintaining those and understanding what opportunities it would give to membership. Big thing is, well, I'll go on the other side quickly, like the cultural aspect and just acknowledging, like y'all have talked about too, that there's such a huge diversity within not only the Nikkei community, but we were seeing a lot of other Asian Americans coming into NSU because they were saying, you know, like some of these clubs just don't really connect with me, but y'all are so welcoming. And we really, we're proud of that because we're so used to the JA community already being so diverse. It's like, yeah, sure, anyone can come in. Let's hang out. Like, what do you want to do? You want to play some basketball? And then the last thing really being sports, where people are just coming through, and every school in Southern California would host like a basketball tournament. And it would be just like when they were in high school and going to basketball tournaments with like their Japanese American leagues, just kind of replicating that, and it all being student run. So the goals were kind of to maintain those pillars in the NSU. On the INC level, it also became this acknowledgement of like, there are so many very organized Japanese American organizations in Southern California. There's a lot more that we could do other than just gathering like once a year or like partying with each other, to be honest. So there came that need for like higher organizing and kind of acknowledging like it's really just this collection of a couple of representatives from each NSU where like, oh, you go to be an INC rep and represent us at this meeting. But then once they realize, you know, meetings aren't really running efficiently because it's just everyone sitting in the same space and trying to get something done, we really need like a president and a board to push things through. That's where things started to get more organized. And there was a little more continuity in that, like a president was keeping track of a calendar and these are the events that we're going to do. And we're going to make sure that people are held accountable for the responsibilities that they say they have. So yeah, I know I am just kind of saying it's all of these schools coming together, but it's really couple of representatives from each school come in, collect in these monthly meetings, and then try to make things happen across all of the schools in Southern California. So the goal when I was president was really just like try and keep things organized and try and establish things more because it was still very new, but we were able to put on some events that have continued annually now. And so I think that's really amazing because it's organizing so many students in the Southern California area to get engaged with community and also to engage with each other. So yeah, when we say community, it's really multifaceted. It is not only volunteering, but it is definitely also social stuff, which we won't go too far into, but you know, college students.
Yes, thank you all for sharing that. Really interesting to already hear just like such different purposes and kind of intended like goals that you all had in your organizations. And I appreciate what you brought up, Yoko, especially as we'll dive deeper into that later, but thinking about like being an organization on the West Coast where you have such a strong community of Japanese Americans who have a connection to incarceration. And then, you know, go places like the Midwest where our community is so small that if we were to break up our organization, there would be no one, right? So very interesting to think about like the different types of organizations, maybe how they interact or don't interact on college campuses. But before we get into that, I wanted to hear more about some of the highlight events of your organization. I know, Emiko, you started to kind of mention some, but I'd love to hear both like internally for your members, but also do you do external events for the greater community? What did those look like?
I can go if no one else is going. So I'll talk about one like external and one internal. So obviously our big external event is Day of Remembrance. Our first one, well, so obviously it was like the whole reason this club was started was that we went to a Day of Remembrance. It was not what we would have done in the way that the content or the way it was structured or the way things were talked about. And we were like, we have that like cultural competency, we have that family background to put on an amazing event, and we don't have the resources. So we went to JSA and we said, can you guys give us money and help us put this thing on, and some like organizational like support too. And they were super willing to work with us and super nice, and we created a really good relationship with them. We also wanted to be clear, like, we're not like some rival thing, like we all want the same things. It just makes sense that we're two different things, because they're very like Japanese culture, like, oh, matsuri and just stuff that's like wasn't necessarily what we're interested in. But they were super great, and we put on our very first one. We had performances, a panel discussion. I learned a lot and it was really crazy, but we had a great turnout and it was really exciting. And then my second year, this is my senior year, we just upped it to the max. We had like almost 200 people show up. We had a fold in for Student for Solidarity, and we had taiko and speakers. It was crazy and amazing, and also scary. Because again, don't know what we're doing. And for that one, we also got help from our Asian Student Commission at UW. So that's also a big part of like, we had the support with JSA. We also had the support with this commission that was made to support Asian clubs on campus, and here they like totally came through and helped us out. And then that was like, we did it. We were like, okay, we made this club because we saw that we could do this thing and we saw an opportunity. And then, so after that, we're like, oh my God, like we actually did it. That's crazy. But then one other thing, we did a lot of like more internal stuff. And one thing that I think was probably the most meaningful for a lot of people was going to the Day of Remembrance protest that La Resistencia held at Northwest Detention Center last year. That's not how years work. Sorry, I erased the pandemic in my mind. My last year at UW, and that was really amazing. They asked us to come help out, and so we volunteered, and we ran the live stream for Densho, and just got to be there and take action, and it was really awesome. And it was a really great time also because we did have members who were not from Washington and who were just learning about all this stuff, and this was like the perfect gateway to be like, being someone who descended from the incarceration, activism becomes like a huge thing the more you dig into your history. And like, I just know a lot of people that were really, really excited and had their minds opened a lot with that experience. So yeah, those were two that stand out to me. Also fun stuff. It's not all dreary and serious. We also have some fun. It's important to find joy in these things. But yeah, those are the two that come to mind for me.
That's awesome, especially hearing the like organizations that you worked with, like Densho and Suru. Like I feel like being in the Midwest, I hear about them and I'm like, wow, celebrities, cool organizations. And we never like touch anything close to that. So that's really cool to hear that you were able to work together with those like huge organizations. I guess I'm sure like NSU is also becoming huge, but that's cool. Thank you. Anyways.
Yeah, I can go next. So for us, kind of similar to what you were talking about with your partner organization with the kind of the Japan Student Association you have over there, I would say that's their objectives and their goals seem to be pretty similar to, I think, what the organization I was a part of was trying to achieve. So a lot of our events, although we say we're a cultural organization, we just try to again, try to make it inclusive and just a social space overall. And so sometimes that can be hard because thinking about inclusivity, if you make it too cultural, then you start to exclude individuals who are not as familiar, who don't know the language, et cetera. So some of the things that we try to do are just to kind of have more fun and do, picks a theme or a topic that a lot of people can, I guess, relate to. So one of them that we tend to do every year is something called that we host, and it's called Asia's Got Spice. And that's an event where we try to invite other organizations on campus, other Asian organizations, East Asian, South Asian, Southeast Asian. And basically what we just do is say, hey, you're going to have a booth for your organization and just cook the spiciest food you can think of, something that from your culture. Bring it, and then what we have is we just invite anyone on campus to come by and to basically try out these different spicy foods. And in that way, it's like an opportunity to not only learn about about what's spicy for Japanese food, which there isn't much, but for a lot of other cultures. So like the Filipino Student Association, that always brings something quite hot, and that's something that people can bond over food, and ultimately you're able to have this cultural connection through that, regardless of who you are. But then one that's more specific to, I would say, Japanese culture is the other big event that we do, and it's at the end of each school year, and it's called the Japan Culture Festival, or JCF as we call it. And this is something that we also do for the community. So Ayako was right, there isn't a huge Japanese population over in the Midwest, but they do exist. It's just there isn't as strong a presence of a community. So we try to do an event like this to try to bring those families out, try to give people a chance to realize that, oh, there actually are, other families, there are other people out there. And what you end up having is you get professors coming, you get families coming, you have these little Japanese kids, and there are people driving from 20, 30, 40 minutes away to come to this event. And the point of it is that it's a Matsuri style theme where we just have different booths, we have food, we have performances, and it's just a time for everybody to just kind of hopefully feel like, or get a sense of, this is what a Japanese Matsuri would look like. So those are kind of the events that come to my mind.
Making me all emotional. Like it was so fun to organize things, even though I know they were definitely stressful, but just thinking about like the spicy thing kills me. But yeah, I mean, there was a lot going on for us, but one of the events that we started when I was president was actually something the previous presidents had wanted to do for INC, but then never had the chance to get around to, which was Nikkei Professionals. So one of our advisors had been like, y'all are so lucky that you have so many great mentors in the Japanese American community. You have people who do all these different professional degrees, and people who serve in nonprofits and like do so many different things. And INC really has the ability to bring together all of these schools and all of these professionals and introduce them to one another. So we got some contacts of like doctors, of lawyers, of people in like marketing and everything. And we're able to bring them together to do like this panel session. And then we would go around and do small groups where people can choose what sort of profession they're interested in talking to, and then kind of hear about how unique their career journeys were because of their Japanese American identity, and see kind of like, I was able to get into this area because I had like a strong community behind me, or I had these connections, or something about my family inspired me to go into this. So that was always, it's really cool to see how it's grown. And the fact that they were able to put on a virtual program last year was really great. Like they're still organizing and doing this. So I think in terms of professional development and kind of engaging outside of the organization, that's something that I look back on fondly. In terms of internal stuff for UCLA's NSU, we always would organize into families. So I see Haruka nodding to this. Yeah. The organization would kind of fluctuate in terms of how many active members you have. But I mean, it would always be like kind of a large number, and it's hard to get to know people all at once. So knowing that, we'd split into these families that were like maybe 10 to 15 students. And they would have parents who'd head each family and kind of plan like okonomiyaki night, or like everyone go see a movie together and smaller events like that, so that a big organization and even like a big school would start to feel smaller. So I have very also fond memories of my first family, and like there weren't that many of us that would show up to events, but we'd always have a really good time. And I think that sort of internal engagement was really important to like that sense of belonging that some people come to collegiate organizations looking for. So while it is really fun and really great to talk about all of that external engagement and like making partnerships, it's like those more intimate events on the inside of organizations too that I think are equally as important.
Cool, thank you. This is making me, maybe I wouldn't completely say this, but want to go back to college, not for the studying, but for all the community and things like that. And this is kind of, I know this wasn't a question that was on there, but I'm curious, like, as I hear you all share different events that you have had and maybe, yeah, getting ideas or whatever that may be, or finding kind of similarities in like the kazoku or the family internal things that you do. Are any of you aware of any type of like larger, like national level organization that brings together maybe JSAs or NSUs, or is that not in existence? I know that like JSA has a Midwest like consortium, and I'm sure there's like a California one or something, but that would be very cool to hear people share ideas across. But just a thought. All right, cool. So last question before we go into the discussion prompts. And I'm sure this will also help us think of some of the topics that we want to discuss, but what were some of the largest challenges your organization faced? And that could be specifically to the time you were there, or maybe something you were aware of in previous years, but.
Oh, no, you can go.
Okay, I can start off. I haven't started off on any of these, but kind of what I touched on earlier, at least for UCLA's NSU, is that sense of apathy. And kind of like there were so many students coming in who are already part of like a Japanese American community or a Nikkei community before coming to college. So I think just kind of took for granted like that you already had basketball set up for you, and like not really understanding the effort that goes into that. So it was kind of hard to reposition and think about, you know, how do we engage people and try to culture this sense of togetherness that, not that it has some urgency, but, you know, like how do we help people get engaged and how do we help them stay engaged? So I think that was probably the biggest thing that we had to combat, because it's also difficult in that it's very different for different people. So you just really have to figure out like, how do we engage like this group of people who's only here for sports? Like, can we get them to come help out at a community service event? And like, it sounds like such a non-issue of like, oh, we have people, where do we put them? Or how do we get them to do more? But we had the privilege to be thinking that way, basically. And then on the INC level, just coordinating with that many people. Once again, the non-issue of like, we have so many people, but also trying to get 10 different schools to do something, and all of their different memberships are interested in different things. So yeah, it's wonderful we have this collective, but are we prepared to actually bring them all together? Was kind of always the question.
That's like the epitome of undergrad, just like, oh, so many things, so many people, but like, are we actually doing anything?
Oh, I'm fitting 110 people into one house. What are we doing?
Yeah, it's the only thing we were capable of. Cool, thank you.
I can go next. I feel like we're weird because like the biggest challenge is for us is probably not the same as others. Like obviously getting people is huge, and you know, we were tiny, we're like ragtag little bunch. But constantly, what I had to do was like justify our existence because we're starting something new. And people love, if you are starting something new, the first thing people want to know is, why do you need something new? there's already things, look, go to JSA, go there. Why do you need a whole new club? Or you just want to like, what, why? People, and they kind of, I don't know, people just always, we always were explaining ourselves. And maybe that's why, like, when I get on here, like, I'm always trying to explain what was unique about our needs that JSA would not have been capable of meeting under any circumstance. Like, I'm always like just so clear about that, because I got so sick of people telling me I should just join this other club, and I'm like, I don't want to go and like reform this club of people who are doing what they want to do and are doing a good job at it, and it's just a different group than the people than me, and than the people that I am, my family. And you know, I just like this constant thing of, why just go to JSA? And I'm like, JSA is not the same as, we're different. There's just like constant thing. So definitely just constantly having to justify our existence as a new club. There have been other iterations of Japanese American NSU type things at UW, and we had heard legends about how this used to be a thing that existed. And it's actually really funny though, because we're trying to come up with a name. We were like, okay, there's JSA. We don't feel like we're part of that. We have a different viewpoint and a different vision. What could we be called? We want to put Nikkei in there. We don't want to be called like Nikkei Student Association. That's NSA. Like, what? People get confused. So we were like coming up with a name, and then we thought we were geniuses when we were like, wait, what if we just called it Nikkei Student Union? Like, there's like a Black student union, like Nikkei Student Union. And we're like, wow, like we like really came up with that. And then we Google it, and it's like 100% like a thing in California. And we're like, okay, well, great minds think alike, I guess. But yeah, that's just a funny side story that I always like to tell, because we really thought we were all that. But yeah, it was so helpful though to see that this was a thing at other schools, because we were like, oh, like we're not that weird. Like, it's like in Seattle, there's a Japanese American community, but it's small, and people who are in it, and the people who are not don't know what you're talking about. They don't know what Nikkei is. They're just like, okay, what are you talking about? So yeah, trying to explain that not only to like the people who are just outside of any sort of Japanese American community, but to other Japanese people who are like, what? Like, it feels bad when you work hard at starting something and people tell you that they don't see why you needed to do that. So really had to hit that home a lot. And that was challenging, but also a big learning experience. And yeah, I think we all learned a lot.
Sorry to interject, but you'll have to educate me, my like Midwest self. Does that exist outside of like California and Yoko and family creating one in Washington? I'm sure maybe there's like some here and there, but is there like a large presence anywhere else to your knowledge? Like,
probably not. I don't know. Maybe Hawaii. I don't know. I obviously don't know anything, because I thought I came up with it.
I mean, I literally heard the term or the word NSU like 2 weeks ago, so I'm behind all of y'all.
There's NorCal, which we separate out from Southern California, because we're like, if you're like 6 hours away, then yeah, you're separate. You might as well be a different state. But yeah, there's one at Berkeley and one at Davis, I think, but there isn't like as much of a connection between the NorCal and SoCal, because once again, we are not driving or paying for flights to see each other. So yeah, there's that, but I haven't heard of any at other campuses. I think there's like a lot of Asian Pacific Coalition type organizations at different schools, but yeah, I don't know about other NSUs.
Cool, thank you. Fumi, I'll let you go, but also there was no NSU at Michigan, right? Or ever?
I don't think so.
Not
that I'm aware of.
Interesting.
But I like the story of coming up with the name of NSU. I totally understand that. But no, Yoko, what you mentioned at the beginning too, a little bit about this idea that everyone's telling you to join JSA, but that's not what you are looking for, right? That's not the people that you're trying to, it's something else, right? And so I think that's really interesting, because I think that feeling was a problem actually with JSA. So this is where at University of Michigan. So this is where I'll dive into the largest challenge for us and kind of divide it up into its multiple layers, but not take too long on it. So in general, I talked about this idea of inclusivity, right? And it was really hard because at the end of the day, we're a cultural org, but really we're a social org. And with any social group, no matter what, you end up with these circles of people that get close, which is great, but it's really hard when people end up becoming friends with one another, and outside of the organization they start spending time, and all of a sudden there are people that are part of the organization but feel like they're not, solely because they feel disconnected to somebody because of how close maybe person A is with person B. And a large part of that actually had to do with your ability to speak Japanese or not. So University of Michigan does tend to get a fair amount of exchange students here and there. And they tend to be on the older side, grad students. They come to America, they're ready to have fun, and they like to drink. And that's totally okay too. But then what you end up having is you have a lot of undergraduate students who that's just not really what they're interested in. That's not what they really want to do. And so when I first got there, I noticed this huge disconnect between people who were there trying to make friends, but then, they would only come to JSA events every once in a while whenever they kind of felt like it. And the people that were there every single time, but because they were basically really close friends with some other people. And so then along those lines, then a big problem ended up being the board members versus the general members. Because then every year you had people applying to board, but because it was the current year's board who would pick the next year's board, the people who get picked are their friends, not so much just the general members who actually came to all of these events. And I may have frozen for a second there just because I saw everybody freeze for a second. So I don't know if that was me, if that was everybody else. So hopefully I'm not being too laggy right now. I'll wait a second because I think you're all frozen for me still.
It might be just on your end because I see
Right.
everyone.
How are we now? Are we good on the connection?
You're good.
You're good, Fumi. I can hear and see you. Maybe you can't hear and see us. Uh-oh, is he frozen for all of you?
Okay, you might be frozen now.
Bummer, it was just getting juicy. Let's give him a minute. Maybe he'll leave and come back. Yeah, I think that's what he's doing. Oh, yep, he's back.
Okay.
Hey.
I'm back. Yeah, I was just getting into this nice.
We heard you
nice
throughout the
spot.
whole thing. So if you just want to start right up where you left off.
Yes. So my point in everything there was basically that, you just had general members who didn't feel like they belonged there. And then at that point, what's the point, right? Like, yeah, you guys are board members and yeah, we're organizing things, but then you're really doing it for yourself. You're not doing it for culture. You're not doing it for the general members. You're not doing it for the organization. You're just trying to throw events. You're just trying to make this club flourish so that you can pick people that you want to be friends with. And that was something that really irritated me when I first got there, because it just didn't feel like the organization was a community. Rather, it felt like small communities within one organization. And then so that was one of the big issues. And I would say one other is just along those lines then is general member retention, right? We always started out hot. Mass meeting at the very beginning where you get anyone who's interested in the club, we would always get dozens and dozens and almost 100 people. But then by 1 month, 2 months in, now we're looking at, we only have 10, 15 general members. Why is it the case? And as much as that we wanted to say that, oh, it's maybe because they're not interested, ultimately I felt as an organization, we're falling short of achieving what these general members are looking for. And so those were some of the big issues that, I wanted to help change when I got onto the board. And that's why we started doing things like the Kazoku program and the family program that Emiko talked about, right? That's a way where you can create smaller groups. And I would always push for the board to remember that this is not about speaking Japanese. This is not about practicing Japanese. This is about making sure that if you know anybody that just cares about Japan, been to Japan, wants to go to Japan, that's good enough. That's all you need to be a part of this organization. And then the last thing I'll talk about was COVID, because I think that's something that's quite, rare and not something that everyone gets to talk about. So last year, we spent the entire year of our organization online. And I thought that was going to be a disaster because it's really hard to, plan events and have, these really fun social activities like you could when you're in person, when you know, you have like 50 or so people on one Zoom call. But surprisingly, I think the Kazoku program and the effort that the other board members and the Kazoku leaders, the parents that Emiko talked about, you know, the effort that they put in to facilitate their families and orient their activities around what the general members wanted, and keeping that general members first mindset first and foremost is what allowed us to kind of overcome this challenge. And now this year, although I'm not a part anymore because I'm still here on campus and I have lots of friends still connected, I went to one of their events the other day, and I've never seen our organization so popular, so crowded before. We had there were over 100 people, and even 2 rooms that were booked weren't enough to fit everybody. So it made me really happy to see that there.
Cool. That's really awesome. I'm bummed that I missed out on the last 2 years of like change, because I think, like, I'll be very honest, the reason I was interested in talking about this topic was because of like my experience and what Fumi talked about at UMish's JSA, where especially being like Shin-Nikkei and mixed, where I was like, I'm both on the like little groupie of like the Japanese nationals and people who are going back, but I'm also Japanese American and I don't speak perfect Japanese. And there was this weird like, okay, where do I fit in? Do I have to make a third bubble? Like this, I mean, like there were quite a few people I think who felt the same way that I did, and those people became my close friends. But that's a really interesting thing that I kind of the motivation for wanting to open this up and talk across organizations and geographies and things like that. So thank you all for sharing so much. Given our tiny little group, we are just going to continue straight into the discussion prompts as a full group, kind of just continue talking amongst ourselves. If Tom or Art, you wanted to introduce yourself and just talk about if you had any type of affiliation with any cultural organization and just what brought you here. I know one of you said you were driving right now, so if you're not able to chime in, that's fine, but I'll give you a second. If not, I can continue.
Go ahead, Tom.
It's been a long time since I've been on campus, as you can probably see from my blank screen. Stanford has an extensive Asian student program. They have a group that's organized under the Vice Provost. It's a university-wide program. I'm not familiar with that since I left well before it was established in the 1970s. I'm here very interested in the experiences of each of you individually and your perspective on student organizations and the distinction between cultural activities and activities that keep you interested in your everyday life. At the university, when I was there were probably no more than 20, 25 Asian students in my class, out of a class of about 2,000. So it's quite different. My father was in a class of 24. Between the early 1900s and World War II, Japanese graduate students funded the building of a house to accommodate Japanese graduate students from Japan. After my freshman year in the dorm, I joined the house and took over the management of the house for 3 years, along with 2 other Nikkei undergraduates. We had 4 Japanese graduate students, 3 graduate students from Europe, 3 from India, the 3 of us undergraduates, and 2 Nikkei Japanese American graduate students. So it's a diverse group, and we had none, nada Asian activities that I was aware of or that I was interested in. The community surrounding Stanford, obviously, most of you know, there are extensive historic and continuing Japanese American and Asian groups. And any interest that I had at times, I was either invited or invited myself to one of their meetings. And I did join a Cal group once and was totally dissatisfied with their attitude toward Japanese American and the Japanese understanding of American culture. But that's only me, sorry. Thank you very much.
Thanks for sharing that. That's so interesting to hear that, how if it wasn't in your university, those opportunities or those organizations, that you like went ahead and searched for them outside of the university. I think that probably is very like similar to a lot of the like founding stories of the organizations we talked about today, is like simply wanting that community and not having to go outside of university to find it, but to find it within. Cool. I don't know, Art, if you wanted to pop in. I think you're the one who was driving.
I guess Art's probably driving, but
Okay. Cool.
You might be interested to know that Stanford actually had an on-campus undergraduate Nikkei specific group in the early 2000s. I think maybe they established themselves late 1990s and then went on into the early 2000s. At this point, it's defunct, but they did call themselves Stanford University Nikkei. So they were a presence on the campus for a few years.
Interesting. Cool. Haruka, would you share a little bit about your background with Nikkei organizations?
Yeah. I didn't get into this when I was opening the session, but I myself am a product of the Intercollegiate Nikkei Council. I was part of the UC San Diego Nikkei Student Union when I was an undergrad, and so I was an officer all 4 years of my undergrad, whether it was being the head of a family, or I took on different board positions and was president my senior year, which was 2004, 2005. So it's been a long time actually since I was on campus, but yeah, I mean, those are very formative years for me in my NSU. And when I had gotten started, we had actually died out right before I entered as a freshman. So we had to revive the organization. But it had originally been started back in 1988. So it does have a fairly extensive history. And we did celebrate, our 25th anniversary a few years ago that we held like an alumni event for. But during my time in NSU, we certainly expanded and expended a lot of energy and effort on growing our campus organization. And so by the time I graduated, we were probably around 250 students strong. But we were really active. We had bi-weekly meetings for our general membership, and then in the weeks in between, we'd have our planning meetings for our staff and board. And then we did have the family program as well, and we have all these events throughout the week. General membership events, social volunteer events. We'd have family specific events. We'd have intramural sports teams for the different programs on sports programs on campus. Like Emiko mentioned, we host our annual basketball tournament too. So yeah, we drew upon a lot of the existing, I guess, youth structures within the JA community in Southern California, because a lot of our members were already part of the Nikkei community here, whether it was by growing up playing basketball in the J Leagues. I think I read an article that mentioned that the West Coast J Leagues over the last couple of decades have had over like 14,000 individuals play in those leagues, right? So I really feel like basketball is really a unifying factor in like the Yonsei and Gosei generation of the JA community, at least in California. That's keeping our community together, really. And then there are folks that grew up in like going to like Boy Scout or Girl Scout troops together, or church groups, right? Like so summer camps through their churches, or the junior or senior YBA, Young Buddhist Association. Those are some overlying like um, I guess, community groups and structures that are already in place that kind of feed into the college organization. And at the same time, there are also national organizations like the JACL that has its own like National Youth Student Council, and now they have a Young Professionals Caucus for people who have graduated and are still looking for a more youth or young professional specific space. But yeah, those are all kind of things that I've been involved with at some point. Um, and but for me, like, I grew up in like a pretty uh, I guess, predominantly white suburb, right? And so I grew up pretty culturally isolated. So joining NSU when I was in college kind of opened up the doors for me to explore my cultural identity. And I think that's the same for a lot of students that come to campus and, didn't necessarily grow up in an immediate JA community. So that was kind of their first opportunity to connect and be part of the community. And then, for me, that experience kind of continued, and eventually it led me to switching careers and working at a nonprofit in the JA community.
That's awesome. I'm hearing the common string of the families or kazoku like thing in these organizations. For me, did you know that the California schools had a families program, or were you had like same energy as Yoko, where you like thought you were doing something amazing and it was actually the same as everyone else?
No, that's funny. No, actually, I had no idea, and I kind of wish I did, because so one interesting thing, I'll just mention this real quick, is so I mentioned I spent 2 years at international school over in Tokyo, and that's really was interesting because mostly everyone that goes to that school, they're similar in that they are Japanese, but they have a large American culture, or American side to them as well. And a lot of the kids from that school, they end up coming to universities and colleges in the United States. So actually, almost all of my close friends that I still talk to this day, maybe about half a dozen to a dozen of them, almost all of them were involved with the respective, some sort of JSAs, or at their different schools, whether it be in California or in the East Coast. Unfortunately, basically not in the Midwest. But the way we learned about the Kazoku program was, Ayako mentioned earlier, we have something called MJSA, which is Midwestern JSA, and it's basically once a year type, I guess, a conference, but it's like a get together of the different JSAs in the Midwest. So that's, places like Michigan State, Michigan, Ohio State, Purdue, Wisconsin, just to name a few. And it was at that conference a couple years back when one of the other schools brought it up, and that's when we brought it into ours. And then when we collaborated with Michigan State just last year, we introduced it to them. So now they're starting it as well. So it's kind of like a chain reaction, but I guess it started in California before anywhere else in the West Side.
Yeah, give credit where credit's due.
We don't need any credit for that. No, you have your ideas independently.
Yeah. I assume that actually the family systems came from Greek campuses, or like fraternities and sororities, right? Because a lot of the ones that were on my campus as an undergrad also had similar family structures in place.
Yeah, definitely a good, strong way to keep organizations kind of like all connected through the different grade levels and whatnot. Cool. So real quick, I just want to shift back to a few of these discussion prompts before I guess we still have some time, but I know earlier we discussed a little bit of like just who like the audiences for our organizations, or who the intended audience is. And we talked about how that's different with being in the West Coast, where there's a much larger community, and that community is kind of broken down into some like different experiences based on maybe family or incarceration. And then the Midwest being like, we're trying to find people, period. But Yoko, I know you kind of told us who is in your organization, but if you all would share a little bit more of like who is in your organization, whether that be generationally, how familiar they are with Japanese, do you have a lot of Japanese language speakers, people who are international students, what does that look like? Or even like Asian Americans, greater Asian American community. I know we saw that in Michigan. I don't know if you see that elsewhere.
So we were always really small. So I can literally just, like, I don't even have to be like, oh, we're mostly this. Like, I know, I can think of every single person. So I know the breakdown. So we were all like Yonsei or Gosei. We never like said like you can't join if you're not this, but I think the premise of our organization was that like we deserve our space, and we wanted, you know, a part of the reason with our JSA, like when I just looking at that room, I was like, this is not where I belong. It's like about half, I would say, like Nikkei or Japanese nationals, and then like a lot of like white people who are just like into anime. And that's cool. That's great that they're getting their community there and that they have that interest that they can fulfill in that space. But for me, a lot of what belonging and being comfortable means is not having to explain yourself. And I wanted a place where we wouldn't have to tell people what the incarceration was and educate. Like we could create events for our campus, but within our own club. I think part of what belonging is not having to explain and be like, no, yeah, we all get it because we all understand each other on that level on it because it's just who we are. So yeah, we were never like, you can't join if you're not this, but we're also like such a niche thing that I feel like other people would probably be like, they probably wouldn't want to. That's all I'm saying. Like they probably would be like, that'd be kind of weird because we were so focused on our history and on the fact that the reason we existed was because we didn't have our own place before. And we want to work with people, but also within our own thing. And I think that mentality really came from the community we came from, because we came from the Minidoka pilgrimage. And that's a place that's an organization that is like super welcoming and super like encourages everyone to go on a pilgrimage because it's important to learn about these things. But it's also an organization that recognizes that like we also need our own space, because if we're always if we're always explaining and teaching, then we don't get to process our own things, and we deserve to be able to do that. So that was like kind of built into the club. So I feel like other people probably wouldn't be too interested in joining. So yeah, we were all like Yonsei Gosei, a lot of mixed people, I think mostly mixed, and yeah, but very tiny.
Yeah, your whole organization is already a family, so cute. Thank you.
Yeah, I would say in our organization, we had a lot of individuals. So what's interesting is that you have a fair amount of second generation in the area because of the automotive industry that exists in the Detroit area. So lots of manufacturing jobs ended up sending Japanese families over to America, and then they would end up staying, realizing that there's a lot of potential in the education system that exists. So in the suburbs of Detroit, especially, you end up with lots of Japanese individuals, and in the Ann Arbor area as well, where I am. It's just that we end up spending our whole lives growing up in America. So you end up with a lot of second generation Japanese Americans, or yes, you also get a lot of mixed people coming from all over the place. And so in general, there was kind of a shift because we grew bigger. Now we start to see a lot more diversity in the terms of kind of their affiliation with Japan and generationally, and also how familiar they are culturally. But right now, actually, our board is primarily composed of individuals who are either half Japanese or actually have no connection to Japan other than just being interested in the culture. So that's kind of what our organization looks like.
Yeah, now since we're in the discussion part, I feel like I can talk. But one thing I wanted to share about like being from Michigan, so I'm from the city that Fumi's referencing, where like I'm a product of just automotive everything. And what's interesting is like, at least what I saw at JSA is when we would go to try to partner with like larger organizations or already existing programs, it was things like the Novi Japan Festival, or what was it called? Novi Japan, that thing, which is like, it's aimed at a lot of people who are not even consider themselves Japanese Americans, just people who are coming here for 5 years or so for the automotive industry and then going back and have these young children who want to stay in touch with things. So it's like interesting when you all mentioned that you maybe work with Densho or Tsuru, the type of organizations we all worked with was like the kind of targeted at the community that was in our area, which is all like, yes, I'm not even identifying as Japanese Americans, just like Japanese folks who are here in America for some amount of time. So really interesting how different that is. But sorry, go ahead, share.
No, don't apologize. Oh my gosh. I think when I entered NSU, there was like some tension between the Shin-Nisei and Yonsei-Gosei populations within the club, because they're like, oh, we feel, or a lot of the Yonsei-Gosei were feeling excluded because they didn't understand Japanese. So if it was like a majority Shin-Nisei group that was hanging out and then they started speaking Japanese, there was like that isolation. And it was like a really big deal my first year, but I was just a first year. So I was just kind of like, oh, wow, I'm so excited to be in college. And I did not realize that that was happening until like later on, when board members started talking to me after we got to know each other. And we're just like, yeah, this is a huge issue. And I was like, I had no idea. Eventually it went away on its own. Like, we didn't have to do anything about it. I think everyone kind of just realized that it wasn't a big deal. And then it was just like, we're all hanging out here. I think it was largely a Yonsei-Gosei group, but with like a fair amount of Shin-Nikkei, as well as like also a pretty fair amount of Asian Americans of like different backgrounds too, that weren't Nikkei at all. They were just there for like good social vibes, and then they would want to volunteer because that gives like that sense of fulfillment and everything. Then we also had some international students who were like, I don't know, I came to America to like be in America, so I don't really want to join just like a Japanese specific organization, because I can have that when I go home. I want to learn more about like the Japanese American experience. So one of my friends is from Tokyo, and like it's really cool that we were able to meet in that way. And like he's learned a lot about my family's history, and I think that sort of sharing is really cool. Also, interestingly, like I'm from Torrance, which is one of the biggest Japanese American populations in the US, or which holds one of the biggest Japanese American populations, maybe the biggest. But somehow I managed to avoid all of the activities that Haruka was talking about earlier. Like, I was not in basketball. I was not in a JA Girl Scout troop. I did not go to like a JA church. I did nothing Japanese American. I played soccer. I don't know. I completely avoided all of these things, not intentionally, but then like throughout my childhood, I spent a lot of time with my Japanese grandparents. And so like a lot of my cooking was Japanese, and a lot of my interests were around like Japanese culture. And I would have friends who were Shin-Nisei or like JA be like, why do you care so much? You're only half. And I was like, what? And didn't super know how to process that. But then coming into an NSU, or coming into UCLA's NSU, like that didn't matter anymore. It wasn't just being only half. It was that like, yeah, you're Nikkei, you're Japanese American. So I thought that that was also super interesting, where it was like, I already had this identity, but I didn't have the terminology for it. So also entering into that space where there's all these different types of people, and that's kind of helping me process and understand who I was a really formative experience. Like, you normally think of your childhood experience as being very formative, but like my undergrad experience was very formative and helped me understand who I am, because I was exposed to all of these different groups within it. So yeah, like everyone there has some ties to Japanese American culture, but I don't think in any way it was exclusive in any sense by the end of my undergrad career, which was really nice.
That's awesome. I like the idea of I know this isn't part of college, but a JA Girl Scout troop blows my mind. Like I can't wrap my mind. I just remember going to like Girl Scouts in my little town, and we had to do the cooking merit badge, and it was like after school on Wednesdays. And so part of it was you had to bring all the tools and supplies in order to do the cooking merit badge. And I brought ohashi, I brought chopsticks. And I just remember getting like roasted because they're like, where's our fork? How are you supposed to do the cooking merit badge if we don't have a fork? And I'm just imagining like how different that would be if I was in a JA Girl Scout troop. Like,
You'd
amazing.
be like spam musubi, and it
That's insane. I talked with
the tradition.
That's crazy. I talked with someone who said instead of selling cookies, or maybe this was the Boy Scouts, instead of doing the popcorn, they sold something else, something that was related to, I don't know, Japanese culture in some way. And I was like, that is absolutely insane. But yeah, if anyone else wanted to jump in on that question about kind of what's the makeup of your organization or the organization that you were part of in the past.
We definitely would attract a lot of people that wanted to practice speaking Japanese. So I guess this is a common trend, I think, Emiko, because you touched on it too, right? You have the kind of the Shin Nikkei that would kind of speak Japanese versus, and then you have that language barrier too. And I think that would occur with us as well, because in the beginning, we were also so desperate to have more members that if people wanted to practice Japanese, then we would say, okay, then that's what we're going to do, because we were just trying to get people. And one way we would try to advertise too is through the Japanese professors. So we would try to, we would send emails to the professor, be like, hey, can you advertise it to your class? Let them know that we're a, organization and people can come to learn Japanese. And so that's the expectation some people would come with. And we would try to satisfy that as well. But that also is what ended up creating this bigger problem too. So eventually we kind of shifted away from that. And then like I mentioned too, that's when also another organization was founded to focus solely on that. And we decided, let's partner up, let's team up. Maybe once a semester we'll collaborate together, but let's try to make some sort of distinctive difference so that we don't have to encounter this problem anymore.
Cool. On that note, kind of the talk that we had that you just brought up and then we talked about earlier is sometimes this kind of split in who is in your organization or what the purpose of your organization is, right? Like I remember going through that, Fumi, and when I was a little bit involved in JSA, where I was like, I don't know, like, am I supposed to be here kind of thing. How do you feel your own organizations maybe have been able to combat that and make sure that there is truly a space for like everyone, regardless if you're just simply interested versus, born and raised in Japan, this is your first year in the United States, whatever it may be. I know you all mentioned the like families and that's a way to kind of gauge interest or like, what's the word? Like make sure people are coming back and have people, but is there any ways that you feel like your organizations did combat that type of, what's the word that I'm looking for? It's like a psychology term, but I can't think of it. Combat that, or ways that you wish that your organization would have done that. I know it's not quite relevant for everyone, but if you have ideas, let me know.
I would say that for us, it's kind of more complicated than that question might cover. Because we are a group of people who come from families who have experienced a trauma. And so the idea of making sure everyone is welcome all the time, it's just not like, it's a nice rosy idea, but sometimes if you have a collective trauma and you need space to process that, sometimes you can't just have everyone be there. And that's just kind of a reality that we would rather have out on the table than pretend that we're all the same. So the idea of like, yeah, we do want to partner with people and work with people. And we're never saying that like that Yonsei or Gosei are like better or more interesting, or like we're not making any sort of comment on society, and the fact that people projected it on us is kind of indicative of bigger issues with race and how we've been led to think about things. But to me, it's similar to the idea of like, this antiquated idea that people talk about of like not seeing color. It's similar for me in terms of like seeing culture and identity as like things that are real and exist, even if they come from things that are arbitrary. So for us, it's about being inclusive in the breadth of like what we consider to be like, I don't know, people we would work with or people who we want to talk to and connect with, but also being protective of our space, because that was part of what we were founded on. So it's like weird and complicated. And it's also weird because you know, there's interpersonal aspects of this, and you never want to be like exclusionary. You never want to tell someone like you don't belong here or something. But this is why ethnic organizations exist. You know, like this is why there isn't a white organization, but there are ethnic organizations. It's because your experience, it's because you deserve a place of your own, and your experience isn't one that is like accepted in the broader world. So you need to find a way to cultivate it individually. That's why these places exist. So we would never pretended to be like, yeah, like everyone come to this. It's like, no, there are some places where like you just want to be around people who understand what your family has gone through on a very personal level. And then there are other times where you want to share. But like, I don't want to be a teacher my whole life just because my family went through this thing, you know? Sometimes you need to process. So it's like weird, and it's a weird line to walk, but we tried to just like not shy away from it, because in Seattle, at least, I know that a lot of people call it like tension or whatever, but I'm just like, no, like we have different experiences. We can acknowledge we have different experiences, and that's okay. We can still be in community together and recognize that we're different, and that's part of the whole thing. So yeah, I guess it's that the question, like it's weird for my organization. It's maybe different than for others. But yeah, it's really complicated. But I don't know. I would hope that we can recognize our differences and still, you know, be collaborative and stuff. But yeah, I don't know.
Thank you. I appreciate that perspective. And like, I think that even just the fact that you were saying that you have a relationship with the JSA or the greater like umbrella organizations for Asian Americans is like, that's a resource in itself. That's a way that you're being inclusive, right? Of being like, hey, there's someone over here who has a really similar experience to you. If this is for this, you know, being able to have those different student organizations. And I think that like also just shows my like bias in coming from a place where I was like, oh, everyone's under one umbrella and we all are just in one organization. So this is like very interesting for me to even just hear like how you all are able to, you have enough interest and that shared history to be able to create a specific organization for that such a specific like purpose is really awesome. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing.
I see that Art has joined us from, he's no longer behind the wheel. Art, would you care to share any of your own experiences relating to the discussion so far?
Yeah, so I'm in a unique position because I have two daughters who are high school seniors right now, and they're contemplating going to college and what college they choose. And so that's why I felt like this conversation is really interesting, because, you know, one of the colleges that considers UW, UCLA is another one. You know, Berkeley was mentioned as well. But also, you know, East Coast colleges where there, you know, may not be an organization like NSA or NSU, all these different ones that I've mentioned. And so it's very, you know, it's very thought provoking, because, you know, they're looking for that kind of a support system on campus. And, you know, it doesn't exist in all places, right? And then I think, and I think the conversation that talked about sort of the tension between different layers of Japanese or Japanese Americans. And I'm a Nisei, but you know, my daughters are, you'll say, Hapa, they're half, and you know, the question about the identity of how do you identify as Japanese or Japanese American is an interesting one. I belong to a Facebook group called "You Know You're Japanese American When," and that one has, you know, really interesting membership where you have people from Hawaii, you have people from Southern California Japanese Americans, you have Northern California Japanese Americans, you have people who you know, whose roots go back to the internment, and it's interesting the different entry points into the relationship with, you know, the Japanese ancestry that are part of that. And I think that's sort of indicative of the challenges of putting us all under one general umbrella, right? And I think that's the the fascination. I was lucky enough to grow up in the Bay Area. I went to Japanese school as a child. So I went to Kimongakuen in San Francisco, if people know that. Then I went on to the public schools and went to the Japanese bilingual bicultural program, which was basically a program founded by Japanese American families that preceded me, and I was benefiting from their hard work incorporating a bilingual program that taught Japanese in an American school system, publicly funded, and taught up to the 7th grade. So it was a very welcoming community for me to sort of transition into that system, and since went on to the other parts of the education system. But that's where I was almost spoiled in this sort of a bubble growing up, where I was surrounded by the predominance of Japanese or Japanese Americans. And, I would say that when I first went to Berkeley as in college many years ago, it was a bit of a culture shock. It was really the first time I felt like a minority, because in San Francisco, like I said, I went through all these programs. In high school, I went to Lowell, which is predominantly Asian. So I never felt like a underrepresented group. But when I went to Berkeley, there was just an aha moment one day when I'm just walking down the street, and I sort of looked around and said, "Oh, I'm not everyone look like me. I am a minority." And it was interesting. I was reflecting upon this the other day, just because I think back to I sat in on the class, an Asian American studies class there, taught by Ron Takaki, who I understand started. I want to say I was listening to an interview with him online the other day. I think he started the first African American Studies program in UCLA back in the day. But it was just interesting to see, because when I went to Berkeley, that was a time when the Asian Americans were really protesting on campus for proper representation, proper acceptance into for consideration as part of the acceptance program. And so that's why when you hear the stories of people suing Harvard or Yale for consideration for Asian Americans and things like that, it's interesting the journey that's gone on. And I know this conversation's sort of rambled on different topics, but it's a very complicated topic, and that's why I was just fascinated to hear other people's opinions, other people's journeys and relationships with, like I said, their Japanese American past, and that's why I joined.
Cool. Well, sorry. How did I just? Sorry, Haruka. I keep speaking over you. I just wanted to thank you for popping in, and even though just being able to contribute now, I loved hearing all of that. And I think also awesome that you're kind of thinking about those things for your own kids going into college. At least for me, looking back, how awesome would that be to have a kind of parent advocating for me or looking into those type of things for me. And I'm sure some of the people on today's panel, maybe you could reach out to, or they could reach out to if they're interested in learning anything more. But I do want to be mindful of time. And so I want to leave it on a lighter note. So if just in a few sentences, everyone who's comfortable, just share what impact did your Nikkei student organization have on you in a few sentences?
I can go first. So I think I'll try to keep a couple sentences, I promise. I think Yoko and Art, the two of you talked a lot about the idea of the past and the history of what brought us here, and in that way that it's like a bubble, it's like a community, and in that same way for the Midwest and the people in the organization I was a part of, it's similar, but in a very different way. Similar in the sense that a lot of us do not know the past and about our families. We don't know much about the struggles and what it was like for our ancestors to come over to this country 50, 75, 100, even more than that years ago, the discrimination they faced and all of the trouble that they went through. instead, a lot of my friends, we don't know much about it. Japan's just a place to go travel. Japan's just a place that has great, stuffed animals and awesome trains and those kinds of things. And we tend to only look at that positive, happy, more optimistic side of things. So in that way, that's something that's very different, but for us as well is kind of like a bubble. And then to just say that what impact, culture. I mean, it's something when you grow up in a place like Ann Arbor, this is a quite diverse place Ann Arbor is. And I didn't recognize the strength that culture has in connecting people, people that belong in the same culture, but to also learn about others, how fascinating, how much that goes into it. And so more than anything, I learned about the power that culture has to bring people together and to make this world a more peaceful and unified place.
Okay, I can go. Okay, yeah, I think that I learned a lot about like leadership, and I think that when you have to explain yourself a lot, you can fine tune your outlook, and that whole experience really like I learned a lot. So I came out, I think, more like confident, and also like, I don't know, I had thought a lot more about the things that I think are important to think about through that process. And I think that like I grew up very immersed in the Japanese American community, but this was the first thing that was like me and people my age were like leading it. And so it was like, whoa, like we can do this. Like, I don't know, seeing what you can do. And then lastly, I think just being able to work collaboratively, like we worked with JSA, we worked with La Resistencia, which is the grassroots organization who's fighting against immigrant detention in our state. We worked with Densho and Sudo, like it's just, we can all like lift each other up. And we were so tiny and needed that so much. And people were really there for us. And so then it makes me think like, okay, like anytime I'm in a position where there's some like ragtag little organization trying to get it together, like you just gotta help everyone out, and we can all do better. Yeah.
I think for me, being in these sorts of organizations and serving in them was just very empowering on multiple levels. Empowering in that they were some of the first places where people were telling me that like they believed in my ability to be a leader. When I was a first year and someone said like, we don't normally want second years on our board, but we want you on our board. Like that was crazy to me because no one had ever like told me that they believed in me as a leader. And similarly to what I was talking about before, being mixed, like that had been diminished as an identity for me in my very like Japanese American community that I grew up in. But in these spaces, it was something that was just like another part of identity that people just wanted to get to know about you. And so it was empowering in that way. And I think also my grandparents from my Japanese side also grew up in Los Angeles. And so learning more about the community that they grew up in and more of the context to all of the stories that I grew up with about like being Jay in Los Angeles, about going to like these dances, about what it was like when the incarceration happened and they had to gather in Little Tokyo to get onto all the buses and everything, kind of understanding like more about that community and seeing how that community still exists today and has adapted and has changed, but it's still rooted in my own family's history was really empowering too, because it's like a lot of these things that I thought were just being passed on through my family were also being passed on this broader scale and had this like huge meaning as just this giant value system that's shared throughout all of Southern California for all these Japanese Americans was really empowering too, because it's like, yeah, my grandparents matter to me. I don't like really understand why. I don't know why I want to carry on this history. And then after learning the way that that history has uplifted a community and like provided a community with space and platforms and opportunities and everything, it's like, okay, now like I can put words to why this matters to me and why I feel so much like motivation to keep this legacy alive. So yeah, just the main takeaway is that like it's been empowering for me in so many different ways, and that's something I'm really grateful for. You know, I always say I definitely could have done better GPA wise in college, but do I regret it? No. Like I took so much away from it. Still got into grad school, so yeah, whatever. But yeah, it's that sort of thing that I never would have learned from studying, but I was able to learn from being around so many wonderful people.
Awesome. Does anyone else want to share anything? It's for everyone, not just the panelists.
Well, let me try. The effect of the Japanese groups did not have a positive effect on me. My sense was the groups were internally focused. My focus was more on community and what I could do within the broader community in which I lived, or to work with the legislative or the legal process outside of the JA community. On the other hand, I have been involved with a sister city group and with JCL for a number of years. So working with them on certain projects is still within what I want to do. And in effect, I can have an effect on that organization. So I think I've distanced myself from the organization reasonably well. Sorry, let me start over again. I have a reasonably good foundation in the Japanese culture and language. So I feel very comfortable with that. So I don't need, quote unquote, an organization. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think that's hopefully that the type of organizations that our panelists helped found and create and cultivate today can leave kind of more positive effects on some of the students that they work with. But that's definitely such a valid experience. I think my impact for me, for my involvement in JSA, like I said, I was raised in an area where there was a lot of Japanese folks that were coming over, born and raised in Japan, leaving in 5 years. And so I didn't tell people I was Japanese. I mean, like they guessed, but I wouldn't tell people I was Japanese because I hated having to justify like why I counted as Japanese, even though I am not going to go live there. I mean, maybe it will. I wasn't born there. I don't speak perfect Japanese, all of that. But joining JSA, even though I was a weak member, I did meet a lot of people who are like exactly like me, like mixed folks, a lot of Shin Nikkei who just had this kind of like struggle between, am I really Japanese, but am I Japanese American? Like I also don't share that history, but I'm not like full Japanese, whatever that means. And so I think my JSA kind of, my experience introduced me to a lot of folks that were just like me and kind of validated, like, I'm okay with calling myself Japanese American now, but yeah.
And I'll just say one last thing. First of all, for the gentleman in Michigan, I'm so glad. I'm that the whole Asian spicy thing is an amazing concept. That I thought that was a fantastic event that you guys put on. And being in Ann Arbor, I did have a chance to visit Ann Arbor probably in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. And I'm glad to hear it's a lot more accepting, right? Because back then there was still the whole anti-Japanese flavor because all the GM and all the American domestic automakers were very, it was, you were either a Ford family, a GM family, or what have you, Chrysler, and it was very anti-Japanese, from the rallies to destroy Japanese cars in stadiums and so forth. So my memories are still of that. And I was struck when I was in Ann Arbor of literally this was not a single Japanese car anywhere to be seen when I visited. So that was my memory. I'm sure it's changed quite a bit over time, but yeah, that's fantastic. But I am encouraged by all the enthusiasm that all the speakers we had today. And I think the challenge for all of us as Japanese Americans is finding what our relationship is with being Japanese or Japanese American, or having that heritage. Because I've had a long journey. I've always been proud to be Japanese American, but I think just like the gentleman spoke earlier, there was a time when you sort of distanced, at least I distanced myself from that, saying, okay, I want to integrate into sort of a mainstream culture and make a mark that way. But I think I've come full circle, understanding that, as I said, there were other Japanese Americans family that carved the way to make my life easier. And I feel like I need to repay that to the community, whether it means supporting the business in Nihonmachi and Japan Center, and making sure that they're going to have a viable future, especially through the pandemic, or otherwise, even little gestures like the face mask that I wear, I bought from the Japanese American National Museum, and it says gaman on it, and it's a sort of symbol to me that outwardly, it's come. For those people understand, it's like, okay, we're all making sacrifices with the mask and such, but it's that Japanese sense of the little sacrifice we're doing as a contribution to the society as a whole, right? And I think that's something that we all sort of internalize in different ways, and we have different relationships with it. But it's something I'm very proud of, and it's or it's just like listening to the Broadway show Allegiance and trying to show support there of just little things, but showing support in both emotional as well as financial support for those venues, because even if it's a little bit, that little bit is making a difference, right? And I think that's and whether it be through mentorship programs with the people that are coming up through the university system, I think it's really important that we have that kind of banding together, because life's very difficult, and we've been able to forward our journey into the greater American society because the people that preceded us did the same. So I'm trying to do my part, and I think these programs are fantastic from way of doing that. And with technology, we're able to talk with one another over long distances, which I think is a fantastic thing. And so that's what I would say.
Thank you. And we're happy to report that now everyone in Ann Arbor drives a Honda CRV or a Subaru Outback. So we made improvements in that department. Haruka, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything before we wrap up here.
Sure. So I think maybe what I can finish off with is just by saying my own experience with college organizations in the JA community actually were, one of the most formative experiences that I've had in my life. Really, growing up, I wasn't part of the community, and so joining my NSU opened that up to me, and it immediately immersed me within a community to feel a part of and to contribute to, and in so doing, also provided me with the space to explore my own identity and to understand it a little bit more. I'm actually Shin Issei. I was born in Tokyo, and I'm a naturalized U.S. citizen, and my family did not go through the incarceration, and so a lot of my own familiarity up until being part of my NSU was that what happened to the Japanese American community during World War II. For me, the way I connected to it was purely academic at that point, but it gave me the opportunity to actually meet and connect with people that I came to care deeply about, and likewise, the entire community became a central focus of my own life, to the point where I've made deliberate choices to center my whole life around my Japantown community here in San Francisco and to serve it. And so, being part of my NSU helped guide me along to that point of recognizing that was my passion in life and my purpose. And certainly, I'm hopeful that being part of an organization on your campus will help lead other students to that possibility of serving their community as well.
For sure. Well, thank you all for sharing I noticed Tito just jumped on, so he's going to have the assignment of rewatching the entire thing. But on that note, this is recorded. So I know we had a small group today, but really encourage you that once the recording's up to share out and share it with your friends. I think you all shared so many awesome things that were totally new from my perspective and maybe new for each other. And I'd love to make sure people are learning about these things and hearing about the different motivations in creating these student organizations and the impact that they had on all of us. So I know I'll be around for a little bit more, but we went a little bit over time. Really thank you for sharing your time with us today and just having a great discussion. So you're welcome to stick around and talk to Hiro now that he's here, but also thank you so much. Yeah, great to meet you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.